Welcome back, everyone. We are doing Hadrian, the Restless Emperor. It's a long episode, so strap in. Get your popcorn. Get your gummy worms. I don't know. What are you eating? If you're not eating anything, think about going and getting something to eat. All right, let's go.
Hadrian, the Restless Emperor, or, less flatteringly, the Absent Emperor. Considered to be one of the best Roman emperors, Hadrian was in many ways the complete
By the way, this is the third of the 5 good emperors. I think we have Antonius Pius and Marcus Aurelius after this.
opposite to his predecessor. Whereas Trajan shared Augustus's perception that an aggressive foreign policy cemented consent for the autocracy at home, Hadrian, on the other hand, proved to be more conservative and adopted a defensive policy for the imperial frontiers. But they were similar in the way that they were both committed to the good governance of the empire. Publius Aelius Hadrianus Afer, simply referred to as Hadrian, was born on the 24th of January 76 AD in Rome.
He was born in Rome. How many of these emperors were born in Rome? I mean, probably a lot if it's dynastic, right? But I've seen a lot of these be born in Gaul or other places in Italy, but not a lot in Rome so far.
But his hometown was Italica in southern Spain, a Roman colony founded after the Second Punic War against the merchant city-state of Carthage around 200 BC. The colony consisted of military veterans from the war. They were to settle the newly occupied territories. Hadrian's family had ever since that day called Italica their home, and they would come to be one of the leading families in the region, growing their wealth and influence to enter the senatorial class in Rome. His father was in fact a senator in Rome, which forced him to live close to the capital. When Hadrian was only 10 years old, in 85 or 86 AD, his father died. This unexpected and probably devastating event would come to steer his life in a new direction, a direction that would eventually lead to the imperial throne itself. Hadrian didn't have any brothers, so his father's inheritance would fall on young Hadrian's shoulders alone. His family decided he needed masculine guidance during his upbringing to ensure he managed the family estates and fortune well. 2 guardians were selected for this purpose, both from Italica. Publius Acilius Attanus, a man of equestrian rank, and the second man was Trajan, the
What a luck of the draw right there.
future emperor, now only in his 30s, but was quickly proving to be a very able soldier already.
So might even be before Nerva is emperor during this time. Not sure. Nerva was only emperor for like a couple of years.
Their primary task seems to have been to look after his inheritance until he was old enough himself. But Trajan, who didn't have any children of his own, may have played the part of a substitute parent for young Hadrian. Trajan was, in fact, distantly related to the boy. He was Hadrian's maternal great-uncle. The following years, Hadrian was educated by a grammaticus in Rome, and he would develop a love for all things Greek, earning him the nickname Gregulus, the Greek boy. It's likely that Trajan's wife, Plotina, encouraged him. She was something of a Philhellene herself. Although well-educated Romans spoke Greek and could cite the Iliad and Odyssey out of memory, Hadrian took his love of Greece too far.
Well, a lot of Romans believe they are from Greece, right? Because of the story of what comes after Troy and the Aeneid and all that. They believe they are Greek in legacy.
According to his contemporaries, his nickname was certainly a form of mild mockery for his obsession. Toga Virilis. On the 24th of January 90 AD, Hadrian celebrated his 15th birthday, and he robed himself in the Toga Virilis, the toga of manhood, and claimed his family inheritance. He set off for Italica to inspect his estates and holdings, but it seems that Hadrian spent much of his time in Italica hunting, an activity that seems to have been very popular among the youth of Italica. Whereas
I would imagine a lot of hunting happening, but I guess hunting is really important. Not important, but popular everywhere.
the Roman upper class sneered at hunting as an amusement for slaves, only fit for spectacle in the amphitheatres. His guardian, Trajan, thought that he was wasting his time frivolously, so Hadrian was once again ordered back to Rome. Perhaps Trajan, who was commanding a legion in northern Spain at the time, personally travelled to Italica to accompany Hadrian to Rome. Trajan was set to be consul the following year, the highest office, second only to the emperor himself, and a rare honour, not least because the ordinary consulship was granted to very few non-members of the imperial family under the Flavians. Tribunus Laticlavius. During the following years, in the early 90s, Emperor Domitian was campaigning along the Danube, and Trajan accompanied the emperor. Trajan was very likely governor of Pannonia during this period, whereas Hadrian entered the cursus honorum, by being a military tribune, Tribunus Laticlavius,
So he's beginning his stepping stone journey.
in the 2nd Legion at Euxtrix, stationed on the Danube frontier during 95 to 96 AD. The 2nd at Euxtrix was a relatively newly formed legion. It was formed during the Year of Four Emperors in 69 AD from Marines in the Ravenna fleet. After the civil wars, it was later sent to Britain and accompanied Agricola in his campaign into Scotland, and some of the same men would have been present at the Battle of Mons Grappius in 83 AD. In his role as tribune, Hadrian was expected to learn from the legate, or legion commander, and professional officers, mostly men risen from the ranks with humble backgrounds. Hadrian was later known for willingness to share the soldiers' simple diet, and his astonishing capacity for remembering the names of soldiers and veterans. In
Very much like a Vitellius kind of like persona that with that.
fact, we know of one soldier who Hadrian befriended during this time, a man named Marcius Turbo, who would later end up as prefect of Hadrian's Praetorian Guard. After his commission in the 2nd at Eutrix was up, Hadrian transferred to another legion on the Danube for a second tour of duty as military tribune. He had barely arrived at his new posting when news arrived from Rome that Emperor Domitian had been assassinated.
96 AD, so this is after Domitian. Of course, you're going to get Nerva, and then it's going to be, you're going to be in line to the throne as soon as Trajan is awarded the next heir.
Marcus Cossius Nerva was selected by the Senate to be his successor. Nerva was old, in poor health, and didn't have any children to inherit the throne or create a new dynasty. Domitian was disliked in the Senate and the upper class in Rome because he had been very mistrustful of them, but the soldiers and the Praetorian Guard had liked the now-dead emperor, so many feared another civil war would follow the collapse of the Flavian dynasty, just as it did with the fall of the Julio-Claudian dynasty in 69 AD. Optimus Princeps. To appease the armies and avoid a civil war, Nerva decided to adopt a man respected by the armies, and one of Flavian's most trusted supporters, Trajan. Hadrian's
Right, like Nerva's best thing was adopting Trajan, basically.
guardian and surrogate father was now set to become Emperor of Rome. The emperor-to-be, Trajan, didn't have any children of his own, so Hadrian suddenly became a very important young man. Hadrian once again transferred to another military posting, this time on the Rhine frontier at Upper Germania, to be close to Trajan, who was governor in Lower Germania at the time.
So Hadrian's getting a lot of experience on the front lines, whether it be the Danube or the Germanian version of the front line.
Upper Germania was governed by Hadrian's brother-in-law, Servianus, and it seems like they didn't get along very well at all.
He was his brother-in-law.
Servianus wrote letters to Trajan complaining that his ward was spending money and getting into debt. The news would have angered Trajan, who remembered Hadrian's carefree attitude in Italica. In early February of 98, a courier arrived at Mogontiacum with news that Emperor Nerva had died from a fever. This meant that Trajan was now the Emperor of Rome. Eager to win his guardian's approval, Hadrian was determined to be the first person to give Trajan the news, so he set off from Mogontiacum to travel the 190 kilometers north to Colonia Agrippinensis. Hadrian didn't get far before his carriage broke down, and this was no accident. The carriage had been sabotaged by
What?
Servianus, who wanted his own messenger
Is that like a rumor, or is that true?
to be the first to inform the new princeps. Hadrian walked for a while before he was able to get a fresh horse and made it to Trajan before Servianus' messenger. And just as Hadrian had hoped, his exploit delighted Trajan. Before going to Rome, Trajan inspected the long frontiers along the Rhine and the Danube. Hadrian doubtlessly accompanied the new emperor, inspecting the armies, securing loyalty, and assessing the tribes across the Danube.
By the way, yeah, it's such a smart thing, by the way, by Trajan. Because the most reckless part of the empire has got to be the Germanian border. We saw that in the Year of Four Emperors. We saw that after that. I mean, obviously, this is the place to make sure everything's good.
The Dacians and Sarmatians had caused repeated problems for Rome in the past decade. Hadrian returned to Rome in the imperial entourage in 99 AD. Shortly thereafter, Hadrian had some sort of problem with Trajan's court attendants. While our sources are incomplete when it comes to this incident, it's easy to speculate that Hadrian may have gotten too close to some of the page boys in Trajan's court. Boys that Trajan very greatly loved. Either way, this incident was patched up by one of Trajan's best friends, Licinius Sura. In December the following year, in 100 AD, Hadrian entered the Senate as questor, and he also married
He's climbing.
Trajan's grandniece, Sabina, probably with the backing of the Empress Plotina. This tied Hadrian even closer to the new princeps and the imperial family. As questor, Hadrian had the task to read out the emperor's speeches in his absence. In the Historia Augusta, it is recorded that the then 24-year-old Hadrian was laughed at for his rustic accent by the Roman elite, but considering Hadrian spent most of his youth in different schools in Rome, it's hard to believe he had any Spanish accent. But perhaps his previous couple of years in the army affected his dictation. The Historia Augusta is not a very reliable source.
Written during the reigns of Diocletian and Constantine, it's a compilation of works by 6 different authors. Okay, interesting.
So it might very well be a fabrication. However, on the 25th of March, 101 AD, only a few months into his questorship, Hadrian left Rome to accompany Trajan in his first war against Decebalus at Dacia. Again, our sources are incomplete about Hadrian's involvement in the war. The Historia Augusta simply states he followed Trajan to the Dacian War in a position of fairly close intimacy. At this time, indeed, Hadrian states that he indulged in wine too, so as to fall in with Trajan's habits, and that he was very richly rewarded for this by Trajan. Hadrian didn't hold any imperium, the right to command troops, during the war. He accompanied Trajan as a comes Augusti, a companion to the emperor. Check out our
Was that to make sure that he stays alive, or because obviously the princeps have had issues with heirs dying in the past, or is that just a different reason?
Previous video on Emperor Trajan, where we cover the Dacian Wars in more detail. During the winter of 101 AD, Hadrian returned to Rome as his questorship was about to elapse. The public in Rome was waiting nervously for any news from the war. In previous wars, the Dacians had proven to be a hard nut to crack for the Roman legions. Hadrian brought Trajan's dispatches to the Senate, an account of the campaign which he read aloud in the Senate Hall. Though the war was not over, it had proven to be a successful first campaigning season for Trajan, even if it came at a high cost, which is evident because we know that the governor of Britannia even sent a small detachment from his personal bodyguard to reinforce Trajan's army after the battle at Tapai. The following year, Hadrian was appointed to office of Tribune of the People.
Climbing up, man. He's just getting more and more responsibilities, getting more and more, not just responsibilities, but also getting different, like, he's verticalizing himself across different, domains. So he's getting more experience, not just in one particular area. So this is really good for Hadrian.
Whether he had something to do is unknown. The power of the tribunate had diminished significantly since the end of the Republic, when a tribune could halt the entire Roman state by vetoing even the highest magistrates.
Yeah.
Hadrian would have stayed in Rome, waiting for news from the emperor, who launched a new campaign into Dacia. Hadrian committed to his artistic pursuits, like poetry and writing. News soon arrived that Trajan proved to be successful in subduing Decebalus and undoing the humiliating peace treaty signed by Domitian a few years earlier. Trajan entered the capital in triumph, and lavish festivities and games were held in celebration.
Right, that's on the Trajan column.
Hadrian was a rising star in Rome, and in 104 AD, he secured the election as praetor for the following year. The main duties for a praetor concerned the administration of justice, in both civil and criminal law. But his new office was cut short. After 5 months into his praetorship, Trajan once again declared war on Decebalus in Dacia.
Yeah, couldn't get enough.
Decebalus had been infringing on the terms imposed on him in 102. A new campaign was prepared, and Trajan set off for the Danube frontier on June 4th, and Hadrian accompanied him. This time, Hadrian was appointed legate of Legio I Minerva, a legion founded by Domitian, probably in 82 AD, for the campaign against the Chatti tribe, given a name that honoured Domitian's favourite deity. Hadrian's role in the war is described only briefly in the Historia Augusta. At this time, certainly, his many outstanding deeds became renowned.
Is this like, oh, no, this is from, sorry. I was like, is this from like a part where Hadrian's on the Trajan column? But this is from the previous video.
There's also an inscription in Athens that details various military decorations he received during the war. But what he actually did in order to earn said decorations is unknown. Before the end of the war, the Pannonian province was divided into two, superior and inferior. Hadrian was appointed governor.
Was that, I forget why they did that, but was that really to allow for more troops to be called for?
Of the latter province, after having served 12 months as legate. Hadrian was commissioned to restrain
or better governance, because it'd be, you'd have more representation.
Dalmatians. Pannonia Inferior faced the Lasiges tribe on the Hungarian plain. Though they had helped Rome during the First War, it seems that they needed to be restrained by Hadrian, perhaps from grabbing land from Dacia during the Second Dacian War. The province had one legion stationed in it, Legio II Adiutrix, the same legion he served as military tribune in a few years before. It seems that he acquitted himself well. He preserved military discipline and checked the procurators who were overstepping the mark. We don't know much more than that, but it's safe to say that a governorship was a great way for Hadrian to win friends in Rome. Hadrian would have received a number of letters of recommendations from fellow senators, putting forth their own candidate, perhaps a member or a protege, to the various postings in the legion and the civic offices in the province. Appointment to an imperial province would almost guarantee you a consulship, and after only 2 years, Hadrian was granted a suffect consulship, probably in the year 108.
What's that? What's a suffect consul?
A suffect consulship was not as prestigious as the 2 ordinary consuls, who launched the year in January and gave their names to that year. Officially, years were referred to as during the consulship of consul so-and-so, whereas the suffect consuls were replacements for the ordinary.
Okay. I got it.
Probably towards the middle and end of that year. Following his consulship, Hadrian did not hold any public offices for some years. Exactly why Trajan showed no interest in sharing the workload of empire is unknown. But it's been theorized that because Trajan's closest friend and advisor, Licinius Sura, passed away during Hadrian's consulship, Hadrian lost his greatest supporters in Trajan's closest circle of advisors. Other promising young Romans suffered a similar stagnation in their careers about the same time. Hadrian did not sit idle during the apparent lack of further postings. Instead, he decided to visit Athens in 112.
Well, this makes sense since it's what he liked when he was a boy.
The city-states in Greece, and especially Athens, had always held a certain allure to upper-class Romans. They considered it to be the birthplace of civilization, art, literature, and philosophy. For Hadrian, who was already a Philhellene, this must have been a very special occasion. Though Athens had long lost all its political importance, the Athenians quickly granted Hadrian citizenship.
I'm sure the Acropolis looked a lot better than it does today then.
Appointed him Archon, the highest magistrate of the city.
Wow.
Athens was still a cultural centre with a thriving intellectual life, and in his role as Archon, Hadrian ensured the Pan-Athenic Games of 112 AD were a success. To further show his Greekness and honour Athens, who showed him such a warm welcome, Hadrian grew a beard. Upper-class Romans had for centuries the custom to be clean-shaven, whereas Greek adult males wore trimmed beards as a matter of course.
That's crazy and interesting because Aurelius will have this similar look to that.
A leading philosopher of the day was Epictetus, whom Hadrian greatly admired, wrote this on the subject. So we ought to preserve the signs which God has given. We ought not to throw them away. We ought not, so far as we can, confuse the sexes which have been distinguished in this way.
Very, very based Epictetus.
The Parthian expedition. After years of peace in the empire and good governance of Trajan, war was once again looming in the distance, this time against Rome's rival in the east.
So we're kind of like on our last step of the Trajan.
The Parthian Empire. The pretext for the war seems to have been the disputed succession of Armenia, a state that neighboured both powers and both considered to be part of their separate sphere of influence. An arrangement had been struck decades earlier, where Parthia would nominate a candidate to the throne of Armenia, but the Romans confirmed the choice and conducted the coronation in Rome. Parthia had failed to confirm their nomination with Trajan, which meant a loss of face for Rome. Despite the Parthians desperately trying to make concessions, Trajan wanted war, and public opinion was enthusiastically behind their emperor. Trajan's true motives for the war can only be speculated about, but he was a great admirer of Alexander the Great, who had, centuries earlier, led his great campaign into the same lands now occupied by the Parthians.
Jeez.
This would be Trajan's emulation of the Macedonian king's conquests.
Everyone wants to emulate Alexander.
Hadrian was appointed to legate by the emperor in preparation for the campaign. In reality, we know very little of Hadrian's role in the campaign during the Parthian expedition. It's recorded that he shared daily life with Trajan. He was assigned to Syria, a province that shares a frontier with Parthia, so he travelled on from Athens sometime during early 113 towards Antioch to prepare the troops for Trajan's arrival and the ensuing campaign. Trajan arrived towards the end of 113, and his campaign was forced to wait for the winter snow to melt in spring of 114 before he could launch his expedition into the mountains of Armenia and then into Parthia proper in 115. Due to internal civil strife, Parthia was unable to put up any coordinated effort to resist the invader, and Trajan was able to march to the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon without resistance.
Yeah, Mark Antony could never. That is probably one of the best, results that against Parthia that I've seen from Rome. I don't know why it was just that easy. I think it was some internal things going on with Parthia, but obviously they'll get some of this territory back. It's kind of like a cat and mouse game in this area.
Trajan seemingly planned to reduce the conquered territory into direct Roman provinces, but the land proved to be hard to control, and Trajan had overextended his reach. Small insurgencies sprung up all over his newly conquered territory, and when another major Jewish revolt broke out in the eastern part of the empire that threatened Roman supply lines, Trajan was forced to withdraw to Antioch for the winter.
And then he's only got like a few months left at this point.
Although it seems like Trajan had plans to continue pacifying the Parthian territories in the following campaigning season, but due to his failing health,
very much like Alexander, you know, like it was conquering, and then something happened.
He was persuaded to sail back to Rome to celebrate his triumph over Parthia. More bad news soon arrived, this time from the Danube frontier. Serious disorder had broken out. Troops had been borrowed from that region for the Parthian campaign. The governor of Syria at the time, Gaius Julius Quadratus Bassus, was tasked with dealing with the situation along the Danube. He fought with Trajan in the Dacian Wars, so presumably knew the area well. Hadrian was given Bassus's previous post as governor of Syria and was promised the consulship of 118 AD. While the sick emperor sailed the southern coast of Anatolia towards the Italian peninsula, his health kept deteriorating, and his entourage was forced to dock in Selinus, hoping the elderly emperor would get better. But Trajan would never recover, but his death seems to have been kept a secret for some time to ensure a smooth succession of imperial power. The new emperor. Many rumors surrounded Trajan's death. One suggests Trajan intended to send a letter to the Senate and let them decide the next princeps from a list he would provide them. Another rumor claims that Plotina, Trajan's wife and good friend to Hadrian, had an impostor stand in for the then already dead emperor to adopt Hadrian as his son and successor.
That's crazy. I mean, that was pretty... If that is true, that's really great. That's a blunder in Trajan's part. You really have... I don't know. You really have to set your successor up. But, I mean, maybe he just thought he wasn't anywhere close to death. I mean, it kind of looks like that was very sudden.
Whether or not Trajan approved of the adoption is unknown, but letters were quickly sent to Rome announcing the adoption. The imperial mint in Rome was instructed to issue coins celebrating the adoption. Hadrian was in Antioch when he received...
Well, was it... I mean, besides maybe some of the older people in the Senate, was it much of a surprise?
Received the letter of adoption on August 9th, 117 AD. A few days later, on the 11th, the official announcement of Trajan's end reached him. The then 41-year-old Hadrian had finally attained the purple and become the emperor of the Roman world. With a substantial part of the Roman army still in the east and in Syria, Hadrian was quickly to present himself to the legion stationed in the east, who quickly proclaimed him emperor. Despite Hadrian's apparent position of strength, he was worried that other governors with armies under their command would be tempted to put in their own bid for the throne, so he sent bonuses to the troops and a carefully worded letter to the Senate, apologizing for not letting them proclaim him emperor before the troops. Hadrian reasoned that the unseemly haste of the troops in acclaiming me emperor was due to the belief that the state could not be without an emperor.
Very smart, you know, similar to how Trajan kind of quelled everybody as soon as Nerva passed. You know, if you have the sword and the gavel, you really are unstoppable, and that's looks like what he did.
It seems to have appreciated this gesture, and they offered him various honors, like one of the highest titles of Pater Patriae, father of the country, along with the right to carry out Trajan's triumph over Parthia. But Hadrian declined both honors, but only reluctantly relented and let the triumph be carried out. But he would not take the role of the conquering general. Instead, an effigy was placed in the triumphal chariot.
Nice.
It was Trajan and Attalus who had been trusted to look after Hadrian after his father's death in 86. Though Attalus is often overshadowed by Trajan, he was one of the two prefects of the Praetorian Guard during Trajan's reign, and wrote from Selinus warning Hadrian of enemies who would do their best to undermine his brief reign, and advised Hadrian to put to death a number of high-ranking officials and some men already in exile. Hadrian decided against his guardian's advice. This was not the time to start killing prominent citizens.
No, it's time for unity, right?
Instead, he swore an oath that no senators would be put to death during his rule. Attalus and Trajan's wife, Plotina, boarded a ship from Selinus with Trajan's body and set sail to Antioch, where Hadrian came to meet them and inspected the remains. These were cremated and brought to Rome and placed beneath his column. Just a few years earlier, the empire had been stronger than ever, but Trajan's Parthian expedition and sudden death proved to be too much for the empire to manage. In the Historia Augusta, it's recorded, the nations that Trajan had conquered began to revolt. The Moors, too, were on the attack, and the Sarmatians were waging war. The Britons were running out of Roman control. Egypt was hard-pressed by riots, and finally Libya and Palestine were showing the spirit of rebellion.
So much going on. My gosh. So basically, I don't know if they're opportunists because of the power vacuum that has kind of shrunk a little bit without Trajan, or it's just because there is, you're taking resources away for like the Parthian campaign and other things that these other regions that were volatile are now cracking.
In other words, the situation was tenuous for the Roman Empire. Its long frontiers required a massive standing army. The cost for maintaining that army was the state's largest expense. So the empire had the smallest military they considered safe for the maintenance of the borders. Naturally, when troops had to be relocated for an impending war, that left holes in the defences. Aggressive wars proved to be dangerous for imperial stability, even when successful. Most of the land bordering Roman territory did not pass the cost-benefit analysis.
So it is getting decision time. Where do we send the troops?
Apart from Parthia and Dacia. A contemporary historian, Appian, wrote this on the subject. The Romans have aimed to preserve their empire by the exercise of prudence, rather than extend their dominion indefinitely over poverty-stricken and profitless tribes of barbarians. Hadrian was now responsible for the unenviable task of saving the empire that was cracking at the seams.
Yeah, like, it's been going so good. How do you keep it from falling?
He started by abandoning Trajan's new provinces in Armenia, Assyria, and Mesopotamia, and all troops to regroup on the Euphrates, Rome's traditional border. He also considered withdrawing from Dacia, but ultimately decided against it. Hadrian's new policy of consolidation, rather than expansion, was deeply despised by his contemporaries.
I mean, yeah, because you're probably like, everything was moving in one direction, you're kind of like halting it, and now you're going the other direction. Everyone that was a part of that's going to be feeling betrayed.
Who saw it as defeatism. What it actually showed is Hadrian's clear-sightedness and his willingness to take rational measures to secure a critical situation, despite going against Rome's conventional view. The 4 ex-consuls.
The 4 ex-consuls.
Early on in Hadrian's reign, in 118, some sort of conspiracy seems to have occurred that would forever taint his relationship with the senatorial class. 4 ex-consuls, Nigrinus, Palma, Celsus, and Lucius Quietus, were the leaders of this supposed conspiracy.
Is it because of the consolidation?
All had grounds for resentment, and they all had been close to Trajan. Nigrinus had been removed from his post as governor of Dacia. Celsus and Palma had been involved in some sort of court intrigue, and had fallen from grace at the end of Trajan's reign, and were sent into exile. Lucius Quietus had been close to Trajan throughout his reign, but had been dismissed by Hadrian from his posting in Judea, so he presumably harbored resentment towards the new emperor.
There's so many people in this time. You have so many people you have to keep happy, because your security apparatus is not like today, where you could just have like really good security. There, it's just so hard. The intelligence is so much worse, and your bodyguard's so much worse than it is in modernity. So you just got to keep this such a balancing act for the emperor.
Were accused of planning an attempt on the emperor's life while he conducted a sacrifice. The attempt was never made, and only Nigrinus was in the emperor's entourage at the time of this supposed assassination. The scheme was discovered only later on when Nigrinus had been dismissed. The conspirators' correspondence was perhaps intercepted by the emperor's frumentari. The frumentari were agents in charge of organizing army supplies. Their role was expanded under Hadrian's rule to act
like a secret service? Wow.
As a rudimentary secret service. They were to gather information about activities of the Roman
Is this like imperial still? Like, is this like an attachment to like the imperial? Like, is this separate from the Praetorian Guard entirely?
Officials in the provinces. The execution of these 4 senators was a political disaster for Hadrian. He had
he said he wasn't going to do it, and he just did it.
Recently ascended to the throne, and promised not to kill any senators. That Hadrian almost immediately had 4 of them executed didn't bode well for the rest of his reign. Many feared that the dark days of Domitian's last years on the throne would come again. It seems that Attanus, the Praetorian prefect and Hadrian's one-time guardian, was the man who actually ordered the executions for these ex-consuls, leaving Hadrian with plausible deniability. The victims had all 4 been enemies of Hadrian, and had the potential of challenging his reign. Perhaps Attanus took matters into his own hands to safeguard Hadrian's ascendance, but
it's not like great emperors haven't done this before. It's just like a binary sentiment. Do you either do it or you don't?
I find it likely that Hadrian knew of, if not ordered, their deaths. On July 9th, 118 AD, Hadrian entered Rome for the first time as emperor. His first task was clear to him: He must repair the trust with the Senate, and establish a reign with their consent, and establish a reputation as a man of peace and legality. Though his reign had started with violence, he did not intend to stay on that path. While in the Senate, Hadrian swore that he had not ordered the deaths of the 4 ex-consuls. Hadrian wanted to put the blame on Attalus, but did not want to fire him from his post as Praetorian prefect. That might upset the guard. He was instead persuaded to resign his post as prefect, and given the honour of ornamenta consularia, the ornaments of the consulship, without holding the office. To further gain popularity, Hadrian had all the public debts cancelled. All citizens who owed the treasury money greeted the news with jubilation. He also introduced a salary for senators who had fallen on hard times. One of our main sources for the Roman emperors up until Domitian was Suetonius. This Suetonius was the official secretary to Hadrian. He controlled the emperor's correspondence, and as such was a very influential figure in Hadrian's court, and would have had access to state archives, from where he could find sources for his biographies. Hadrian's buildings.
Alright, so of course Trajan was a big builder. Hadrian, probably a big builder too.
Hadrian was a great admirer of Rome's first emperor, Augustus, and closely
Who wouldn't be?
modelled his own reign after his idol. He had refused excessive honours from the Senate at the beginning of his reign, just like Augustus. To make the connection to Augustus even more evident, Hadrian decided to restore many temples constructed by Agrippa, Augustus's closest friend. Most prominent of these projects is the Pantheon.
I was about to say, it's got to be the Pantheon, right? Because if you ever notice, right in the front, there's Agrippa, right at the front of it.
Agrippa's original temple was damaged by a fire in 80 AD. Hadrian's remodeling would become one of the most evocative examples of Roman engineering prowess. It remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world to this day.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful place, especially on the inside.
Despite this enormous feat of engineering, Hadrian refrained from putting his own name on the building, instead leaving the old inscription honouring its original founder, Agrippa. Hadrian's modesty was calculated, but nonetheless an honourable thing to do. Early on in Hadrian's reign, work began on his famous villa outside Rome. The size of this project meant that construction was ongoing for most of his reign. Though it's called a villa, it was intended to be a centre of government, close enough for senators, who were forced to live close to Rome, to attend official meetings and public affairs. Another great work was that of the Temple of Venus, between the Forum Romanum and the Flavian Amphitheatre. This was one of the largest temples in Rome, rivaling the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. Hadrian the Traveller. In 119 AD, Hadrian left Rome to tour Campania, a region just south of Rome. Perhaps he was missing Athens, for this was a thoroughly Greek region. Despite being part of the Roman state for centuries, they still followed their own customs and spoke Greek. Hadrian visited many of the prominent towns in the area. Various gifts and honours were granted. This journey in Campania probably gave Hadrian the idea for a longer trip, where he planned to visit all the provinces of the empire, again modelling himself after his idol, Augustus, who...
Well, very different. Campania's probably the best place to travel to in the entire empire, so you've already reached your pinnacle. I mean, now for Hadrian's probably like Athens is better than this, but in other places could be interesting, like Alexandria and other places. But you know, this area is very different than like Britain.
himself wanted to inspect problems for himself. It was only when Augustus was older and could delegate friends and family to look after imperial affairs in his stead. Upon returning to the capital, Hadrian felt secure in his position as the emperor, and no immediate threats to the empire from within or without requiring his attention, so he set out from Rome in 121.
Well, all that, I mean, maybe we'll get back to it, but all that, what we were talking about before, like the strikes that were happening in Britain, in Egypt, in Libya, in Dacia, in pretty much everywhere. What's going on there?
AD, and removed, as Cassius Dio writes, all imperial trappings, for he never used these outside Rome. Historia Augusta claims he generally wore the commonest clothing, refusing gold ornamentation on his sword belt, fastening his cloak with an unjeweled clasp, and only reluctantly allowing himself an ivory hilt to his sword. He set sail for Massilia in southern Gaul, and made his way up the Rhone River to Lugdunum, where he was probably greeted by all the pomp necessary for an imperial arrival. Coins hail him as restorer of Gaul. His destination was the Rhine frontier, where he wanted to implement his new strategy of defensive imperialism. Hadrian was not a fresh-faced boy anymore. He was a soldier first, having served for many years on the frontiers of the empire and participated in many of Trajan's wars. When he arrived at the garrisons on the frontier, he introduced the highest standards of discipline, keeping the soldiers on frequent exercises. Hadrian led by example and shared the everyday life of the ordinary soldiers. Hadrian was naturally inquisitive. He inspected all aspects of the garrisons, from weapons to the palisades, and made sure everything was up to the highest standard. Cassius Dio writes, "He personally viewed and inspected absolutely everything." To further solidify Hadrian's defensive policies, he had the legions construct a massive wooden palisade that would fill a gap in the Roman border between the Rhine and Danube rivers. Its exact purpose has long been speculated about, for the tribes on the other side of the lines posed no threat of invasion. It's likely a statement piece, a part of Hadrian's propaganda. These palisades were not built for a particular threat. It was to be a permanent fixture on the border of an empire and a statement of imperial-wide policy.
It's interesting. You know, I mean, Germania has always been like that place where, you know, tribes could probably threaten. So they're saying that some parts of this region was a little bit more pacifist, but still the wall would create some sort of symbolic measure to this entire. But I mean, because think about it, like right when Hadrian took over, there was all this like upheaval everywhere. Not necessarily because of him, but just because of the resourcing from to Parthia and other places. Maybe this was to solidify the strength of the empire.
To Britannia. His next destination on his great tour of the empire was Britannia, a province that had just recovered after a few years of unrest. When arriving in Britain in the summer of 122 AD, Hadrian brought with him Legio VI Victrix, perhaps to replace Legio IX Hispania that might have been destroyed during the recent unrest. During his Britain expedition, Hadrian received news.
And I forget if the lines, how far up is the territory at this time? We're about to see
that Suetonius, his secretary and famous biographer, had acted in an offensive manner to the emperor's wife, Sabina. They had behaved at that time toward his wife, Sabina, in a more informal manner than respect for the imperial family required. While the marriage between Sabina and Hadrian seems to have been a loveless relationship, they never had any children, and Sabina is said to have publicly called Hadrian's personality monstrous.
Okay, so this is probably where we get Hadrian's Wall, right? Right there.
Court etiquette would still have to be maintained. We don't know what offense Suetonius is guilty of, but one of the Praetorian prefects was also dismissed during this incident, so some sort of offense seems to have taken place that called for the dismissal of two key figures in his court. One of the most evocative of Roman monuments in Britain is Valum Aelium, Hadrian's Wall. It's scarcely mentioned by our written sources of the day. The Historia Augusta simply states, the first to construct a wall 80 miles long, which was to separate the barbarians from the Romans.
The barbarians.
Inscriptions on the wall suggest that construction began before Hadrian got to Britain, probably sometime in 118.
Just probably like, get to work on that wall, I'll be there soon.
Just as his buildings in Rome made a political point, so too we have to read the subtext for the construction of this massive wall. This was a restating of his point of Rome's new defensive stance. To the east. In the winter of 122 AD, Hadrian continued his travels back to Gaul and on towards Spain, and to the capital of the province of Hispania, Tarraconensis. Hadrian had received news of
Oh wow, look really cool looking city there.
a rebellion in Mauritania and renewed riots in Alexandria both called for his attention. We know very little of Hadrian's travels in North Africa. However, both problems seem to have been resolved before the emperor had to intervene in person. Perhaps the fact that Hadrian was on his way may have dissuaded further disturbance. A bigger problem was looming in the east. Parthia was once again causing disturbances in the east. Hadrian had to put his tour of North Africa on hold for now, and set sail for Syria, where he arrived in June 123. The Historia Augusta simply claims that the war with the Parthians had not at that time passed beyond the preparatory stage, and Hadrian...
So he's just building a wall, solidifying the boundaries. That's all he's doing at this point. I'm not saying that's all he's doing, but that's what he's doing. He's really just like creating these boundaries to solidify power.
Checked it by a personal conference. Parthia was in no shape to conduct a large-scale military invasion into Roman territory. They had not fully recovered from civil strife and the devastation of Trajan's campaign 6 years earlier. They were probably seeking the return of some hostages, and perhaps even some monetary reparations. Whatever the deal, war was averted. Again, modelling after his idol, Augustus, who also negotiated with the Parthians instead of waging war. After having dealt with the Parthian problem, Hadrian's entourage continued north, touring the border against Armenia. They were headed towards Trapezius, a Greek colony on the Black Sea coast, made famous by Xenophon in his epic tale of the 10,000 mercenary hoplites who got stranded in Persian territory after their employer died in a failed attempt to wrestle the throne from his brother.
Yeah.
The 10,000 were continually harassed and attacked on their march back to Greek territory. Trapezius was the first Greek city they reached after their grueling march, where they sacrificed to Zeus and Heracles. Hadrian, it seems, followed this example.
So very much, once again, very much, going back to his Greek interest here. So it's probably like very much a fun hermitage for him.
And a similar sacrifice took place during his stay in the city. Hadrian continued his travels westward, along the coast of the province of Pontus Bithynia, probably stopping in harbours such as Amissus, Sinope, and Heraclea Pontica. The imperial entourage wintered in Nicomedia in late 123. Imperial coinage hailed Hadrian as restorer of Nicomedia. The city had just been ravaged by an earthquake shortly before his arrival. Wherever Hadrian went,
I mean, I guess some of the emperors did what he's doing, but I haven't really, thought about it that much. But he is actually like circumnavigating his empire. That's really admirable, actually.
and he invested in urban infrastructure. He commissioned aqueducts and canals, new roads, and he paid generously for the construction of temples and other public buildings. Perhaps Hadrian met Antinous for the first time during his stay in the region. Antinous was born in Claudiopolis. He was a young boy who Hadrian would
There he
take
is.
great interest in.
He's there.
He would become something of a favourite and lover of the emperor. It's perhaps too early to infer that they were lovers at this early stage, but somehow Antinous was taken along with the imperial entourage. Perhaps he was hired in some capacity in the imperial staff, and Hadrian took an interest only later on. Either way, in the spring of 124, Hadrian and his entourage sailed across the Sea of Marmara to Thrace before setting out for the province of Asia. Hadrian again showed his interest in the past by visiting the site of the Battle of Granicus, where Alexander the Great defeated the Persian forces for the first time in 334 BC. A curious incident occurred when Hadrian visited Pergamon. Galen records that Hadrian struck one of his attendants in the eye with a pen. When he realized that the slave had become blind in one eye as a result of this stroke, he called him to him and offered to let him ask him for any gift to make up for what he had suffered. When the victim remained silent, Hadrian again asked him to make a request of whatever he wanted. He declined to accept anything else, but asked for his eye back, for what gift could provide compensation for the loss of an eye.
Jeez.
A clear indication that though he saw himself as something of an intellectual, well-versed in classic philosophy, he was prone to outbursts of rage. Hadrian seems to have been a cocksure man, with above-average intelligence, with best education you could get in Rome at the time, and he did not suffer fools gladly, apparently. Another quite telling
That's an interesting little story there.
anecdote is when Hadrian was on one of his journeys, a woman stepped forward as the emperor passed by and made a request. "I haven't got the time," Hadrian said. With considerable presence of mind, she replied, "Well, stop being emperor then." This struck home. The emperor relented and gave her the hearing. It's remarkable how approachable the emperor seems to have been, if anyone can just walk up to him on the street and request a hearing. A far cry from later centuries when
Well, it's not that anyone can just walk up to it. It's what she said. She humbled him.
emperors carried themselves as demigods, too far removed for approach. While in Ephesus, the young men of the city sang a hymn in the theatre for the emperor, who listened to it in a gracious and friendly manner. From there he sailed to Rhodes, where he would have seen the remains of the Colossus of Rhodes, a huge statue of Helios erected in the early 3rd century BC. A 6th century writer, John Malalas, claims that Hadrian restored the Colossus, but this claim has been challenged by modern historians.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know more about that.
Though it would have been a typical Hadrian thing to do, no other sources corroborate the restoration. After his visit to Rhodes, Hadrian sailed towards Athens, the city that had welcomed him so warmly many years earlier. There he took part in the esoteric Eleusinian mysteries. An inscription has been found in Eleusis that refers to the emperor, Hadrian, God, and Pan-Helen. While in Athens, Hadrian noticed that merchants were marking up their prices during the busy period of the mysteries, when many travellers would come to the city to take part in the rituals. And Hadrian warned the merchants, "I want the vendors to have been stopped from their profiteering, or else a charge to be brought against them."
Jeez. All right. So a man for the people out there.
Then Hadrian set off for a tour of the Peloponnesos, visiting Megara, where a temple was built by the emperor. He visited Corinth, and the site of the famous battle just outside Mantinea, fought between Thebes and a Spartan-led army composed of many city-states. The brilliant Epaminondas led his Thebians to victory, but was fatally wounded in the fighting, and a pillar with a shield was erected on the site. If Antinous accompanied Hadrian at this time, they would have very likely visited the city of Mantinea as well. Mantinea was the supposed origins of the Greek settlers of Claudiopolis, Antinous' birthplace. Hadrian was back in Athens by March of 125 to enjoy the great theatre festival of Dionysia. Athens saw the most construction out of almost any other city during Hadrian's reign. Libraries, a pantheon, an aqueduct, and a massive temple dedicated to Olympian Zeus, and much, much more. In the spring of 125, Hadrian set off northward toward Dyrrhachium. The emperor was finally headed back to Italia. On his march in central and western Greece, he would have visited Delphi, and as usual, he resolved local disagreements and started many building projects.
How was Delphi at the time? Was it still in its prime, or was it starting to decay?
And of course, Hadrian could not resist hunting in this mythical land. It is said that he downed a bear and dedicated it to Eros and wrote a short poem. Be
Berries?
gracious, kindly
Or is that something else?
receive the best parts of this bear from Hadrian, the one he killed with a blow from horseback. You, of your own accord, in recompense let grace be breathed soberly on him by Aphrodite Urania. Back to Rome. Before heading to Rome, Hadrian's party sailed into the harbour of Syracuse. Hadrian ascended
Literally, I don't think he's left a stone unturned with his little tour.
the massive volcano, Etna, in the middle of the night because he wanted to see the sunrise at the summit. The active volcano had just a few years earlier devastated the local area with a massive eruption. After a quick tour of western Sicily, Hadrian was heading for Rome. In Rome, Hadrian inspected the newly restored Pantheon and his new villa near Tibur, though it was probably not complete, but it was habitable. The villa was both a palace for public business and a private resort for Hadrian. Less than 1.5 years elapsed before the restless Hadrian left the outskirts of Rome for a tour of northern Italy.
Jeez, he's just not stopping.
On his return, he ordered the
Well,
peninsula
it's called the Restless Emperor.
to be reorganized into 4 administrative regions governed by ex-consuls. Previously, Italy had been ruled by local authorities, with some supervision from the Senate in Rome. This new division would put Italy on the same level as any other province of the empire, and the reform proved very unpopular. It was repealed shortly after his reign. On the 11th of August, 127 AD, Hadrian was back in Rome to celebrate the 10th anniversary of his ascendance to the imperial throne.
All right, so he's 10 years on the throne.
10 days of festivities and games were held to mark the occasion.
Nice.
It seems that Hadrian fell ill during or just before these games, because they were held to promote the emperor's health. The emperor recovered, and finally accepted the title of Pater Patriae, father of his people, a title he was awarded upon his ascendance 10 years earlier, but had at that time deemed himself unfit for the title, modelling himself after Augustus, who had also modestly refused the title initially. Africa. Hadrian, ever the restless, was eager to resume his travels, and in his previous tour his visit to northern Africa had been cut short due to the Parthian incident. South Africa made for a natural first destination. Augustus had made plans to visit the region during his reign, but was prevented due to a storm. Hadrian was the first reigning emperor to ever visit the provinces in North Africa.
What? That's such a bad look on the imperial to rule but never to visit. Good for Hadrian.
The Historia Augusta records that it rained on his arrival for the first time in the space of 5 years, and for this he was extremely popular with the Africans.
He brings the fertile soil.
As usual, Hadrian inspected every aspect of the province. He introduced tax breaks for impoverished farmers. New building projects were started, but he was particularly interested in border security. Another massive wall was under construction before Hadrian went to the region. The wall shares many similarities with the more famous wall in Britannia, but built out of local material, primarily mud bricks. The main purpose of these walls seems to have enabled the legions to better manage relations with the tribes bordering Roman territory. Those relations were primarily friendly and trade-orientated, only sometimes hostile. Most of the tribes had treaties with Rome and benefited from having good relations. The wall was built not to exclude,
Of course, this image is like really Germania, but
to control. In June, he reached the province of Numidia, where Legio III Augusta was stationed. Its legate had trained the troops hard for the coming inspection. They knew Hadrian would only be satisfied by the best. An inscription has been found in the area that records some speeches Hadrian made to the troops after they had performed an exercise in front of him. He said, "Military exercises, in a manner of speaking, have their own rules, and if anything is added to or subtracted from them, the exercise becomes too insignificant or too difficult. The more difficulties that are added, the less pleasing is the result. Of all difficult exercises, the most difficult is the one you performed, throwing the javelin in full battle dress. I approve of your eagerness." The commander also received praise. "I commend Catilinus, my legate, because he directed you to this exercise, which took on the appearance of a real battle, and which has trained you in such a way that I can also praise you. Your prefect, Cornelianus, also has performed his duties very well. However, the cavalry skirmish did not please me." The legion received praise when Hadrian
always something to be added.
thought it applicable, and scorn when something displeased him. He spent much of his life in military
Well, one thing that's interesting is like his travels has really created a readiness across the empire, readiness to please, readiness to be ready because of his when he's pleased, and his buildings and his monetary gifts that he's been giving really gives like the entire he could come here next and we better be ready, and that creates some security inevitably. Actually, wonder if any other emperor followed suit of Hadrian.
camps and on campaign. He knew what he was talking about, so his feedback was valid. Next on Hadrian's itinerary was Greece and Athens. Once again, he wanted to take part in the Eleusinian mysteries, but before setting out for Greece, he sailed back to Rome for a couple of weeks to deal with some crucial business.
Okay.
A new district in Athens was named after the emperor, Hadrianopolis, and a massive arch divided the new city quarter from the old. The inscription on the arch reads, "This is the city of Hadrian, not of Theseus." Theseus, of course, was the legendary founder of Athens.
Yeah.
This very brazen proclamation might not have been appreciated by the Athenians.
Probably
And
not.
just like Pericles, who was responsible for Athenian hegemony in the 5th century BC, Hadrian wanted to enact a sort of pan-Hellenic league, a sort of congress that all Greek cities could send their delegates. The centre of this pan-Helleon was, of course, Athens.
Hadrian was born too late.
Pericles' idea for the pan-Helleon was to better combat the threat of Persia. Exactly what Hadrian wanted to achieve is
Parthia.
unknown. Athens clearly meant a lot to Hadrian. It appears almost as an obsession with its glorious past. After about 6 months in Greece, the imperial entourage
Hadrian was a history buff, just like we are.
sailed across the Aegean Sea to Ephesus and a tour of Anatolia and Syria, where he met with foreign kings and dignitaries. Though many disapproved of Rome's purchasing peace with subsidies, not Hadrian. He boasted that he won more by doing nothing than waging war.
Very true, very true. I mean, he's not doing nothing either. He's doing a lot.
Jerusalem had been devastated by Titus in 70 AD. The high priestly families disappeared, the temple was in ruins, and most of the Jews in Judea were localized into villages. Hadrian deemed it was time to reoccupy Jerusalem. It was to be renamed Aila Capitolina, after his family, and the temple was to be rebuilt, but this time in honor of Jupiter. Hadrian
So, how's that going to go over?
himself plowed parts of the line around the city boundary. Jerusalem was dead, and Aila Capitolina was to be a new Roman colony.
All right.
En route
So we're turning the page there.
to Egypt, Hadrian stopped by in Pelusium, where Gnaeus Pompey, Julius Caesar's one-time friend turned rival, was stabbed to death by the Egyptians hoping to curry favour with Caesar.
Didn't work out.
Pompey's body was burned on the shore, and a small monument erected above it. Hadrian located the grave and wrote this: "How pitiful a tomb for one so rich in temples." Hadrian planned to sail up the Nile, but he had to wait until fall, when the annual flood would subside, so he travelled to Alexandria, the second largest city in the empire. For a long time, the city had suffered from occasional bouts of riots, because the Jewish and Greek population did not get along.
I'm sure he really liked going here too, given like how he imagined, his Hellenistic love and also a lot of the spots that Alexander went to, he went to. So I'm imagining this was also a really big hotspot for his tour.
Hadrian restored damaged buildings and enjoyed the intellectual life in the city, presumably with Antinous. A poem survives from this time that describes Hadrian and Antinous out on a hunt together. First, Hadrian, with his brass-fitted spear, wounded the beast, but did not kill him, for he purposely missed the mark, wishing to test to the full the sureness of aim of his beloved Antinous, son of the Argus Slayer. Death on the Nile. When the Nile flood had subsided, the imperial barge sailed up the long river. Hadrian would have visited all the famous landmarks. They visited Memphis, the original capital of the Old Kingdom, and the pyramids, and the Sphinx. Towards the end of October of 130 AD, Antinous' lifeless body was recovered from the riverbanks. Dio Cassius writes that Antinous had been a favourite of the emperor and had died in Egypt, either by falling into the Nile, as Hadrian writes, or, as the truth is, by being offered in sacrifice.
Okay, so I thought that he was the successor. Guess not. I might be thinking about something else. Okay. Whoopsie. All right. It's crazy.
Hadrian, as I have stated, was always very curious and employed divinations and incantations of all kinds. The Historia Augusta writes disapprovingly that he wept for the youth like a woman. It's been suggested that Hadrian was suffering from some sort of illness, and that Antinous sacrificed himself in order for the emperor to recover. But what exactly happened on that river so long ago has long been debated. But it's clear that Hadrian was
What do you guys think?
devastated by his loss. Antinous was deified by the emperor, and a city was built on the location of his death, Antinopolis. His cult spread quickly throughout the empire. Local elites, eager to curry favour with the princeps, built temples to honour the dead youth. Antinous came to be associated with Osiris in Egypt, Mercury in Italy, and Dionysius in Athens. This tragic death did not stop the imperial barge, and the emperor continued his tour of the Nile, after which he spent some months in Alexandria, before setting off for Syria in spring of 131 AD, and then Asia, before heading back to Athens.
And in Asia. Asia being Turkey.
When news reached the emperor that the Jewish population had once again revolted. The Bar Kokhba Revolt. The Jews were furious that their holy city had been desecrated. The immediate cause seems to have been the collapse of King Solomon's tomb in Jerusalem during the construction of Hadrian's new city. Dio Cassius writes, "At first the Romans took no account of the rebels. Soon, however, all Judea had been stirred up, and the Jews everywhere were showing signs of disturbance, were gathering together, and giving evidence of great hostility to the Romans, partly by secret, and partly by overt acts. Many outside nations, too, were joining them through eagerness for gain, and the whole earth, one might almost say, was being stirred up over the matter. The situation was extremely precarious. The Romans stationed in Judea had been overwhelmed, and the reinforcements sent from Syria and Egypt had been crushed. Hadrian sent for his best general, Sextus Julius Severus, who was a governor of Britain at the time, so he would have to travel across the whole empire to reach the theatre of war. The leader of the revolt was a man called Bar Kokhba, a ruthless man who styled himself the Messiah. He butchered the Christian population in Judea because they were not willing to help him against the Romans and demanded that they deny Jesus as the Messiah.
Wow.
Hadrian's response seems to have been massive. Best guesses suggest some 13 legions took part in the war, a disproportionately huge deployment, but Hadrian left nothing up to chance.
Nothing's up for chance. Oh my.
Bar Kokhba and his revolt must be utterly crushed. The legions moved methodically, just like Vespasian had done, capturing every strong point and forts one after another. And at the end of 135 AD, 3 years after the revolt broke out, it was crushed. Judea was almost completely depopulated of Jews, either by death or enslavement. Judaism was to be rooted out. A statue of Hadrian was erected on the site of the Holy of Holy, and pagan shrines were built over Jewish places of worship. Hadrian seems to have accomplished his task. This was the last major Jewish revolt against Rome. Henceforth, the ancestral capital of the Jews would be called Aelia Capitolina, and Jews were forbidden to enter the city.
Wow. Wow. Definitely turning the page there.
Succession.
Succession. Here we go.
In spring of 134 AD, Hadrian returned to Rome. The emperor was sick and realized that his days were numbered, and without any children to inherit the throne, Hadrian needed to adopt someone who was fit for the throne, and who would honor the defensive policies Hadrian had enacted. Hadrian's brother-in-law, Servianus, had been one of Trajan's closest advisors, generals, and was even considered to be a strong contender for the throne upon Trajan's death. Servianus was about 90 years old at the time, so he was a strong contender for the throne upon Trajan's death. Servianus was about 90 years old at the time.
Is he 90? Jeez. Nah, bruh. You might be fit for the US presidency at that age, but you ain't fit to be emperor.
So he was clearly too old. Besides, Servianus and Hadrian did not get along well. Servianus had been a critic of Hadrian throughout his life, but Servianus had a grandson, Pedanius Fuchsius, who was in his late teens at the time, was the closest male family member Hadrian had. In 136, the emperor unexpectedly announced the adoption, Lucius Saeonius Commodus. We don't know much about his suitability for the imperial throne. The Historia Augusta simply claims that his sole recommendation was his beauty. Disregarding his suitability, Saeonius Commodus was in very poor health and would die before Hadrian. Hadrian was beginning to act erratic towards the end of his life. Longtime friends and supporters like Aulus Platorius Nepos and Quintus Marcius Turbo were both removed from Hadrian's court and held in the greatest abhorrence. Marcius Turbo had been a centurion in Hadrian's first posting as military tribune in Legio II Adiutrix, and had ever since been very close to Hadrian. Marcius Turbo had acted as praetorian prefect since 125 AD. Pedanius Fuchsius had probably considered himself the next princeps until the adoption of Saeonius Commodus, which would have disappointed the young man, who it seems was plotting to stage a coup. The plot failed and Pedanius was put to death. In addition, all members of his family, because of him, were done away with in a lowly manner.
Jeez.
Pedanius' grandfather and longtime critic of Hadrian, Servianus, was also put to death, or
Put to death. He was at death's door.
instructed to commit suicide. Sabina, Hadrian's wife, also died about the same time. The couple seemed to have loathed each other, so perhaps Sabina was somehow linked to the Pedanius conspiracy.
Wow.
Sabina was only in her late 40s or early 50s at the time, but her death might have been a mere coincidence. Hadrian had found a new interesting boy who seems to have been the apple of the emperor's eye, the future Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Marcus was 15 years old in 136 AD when he was instructed to betroth one of Saeonius Commodus' daughters.
I thought that was somebody that comes before Marcus Aurelius.
This might give us a clue as to why Hadrian adopted Saeonius Commodus in the first place, hoping he could keep the throne warm, only long enough for Marcus and Commodus' own son, the future Emperor Lucius Verus, to come of age. With Saeonius Commodus dead, Hadrian adopted Titus Aurelius Fluvius Varianus Arius Antoninus, now commonly referred to as Antoninus Pius.
Antoninus Pius. That's who I was thinking of. So that was kind of confusing earlier with the other guy that was very similarly named.
Antoninus was instructed to adopt Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus as his sons and potential successors. Antoninus was a traditionalist and a distinguished senator of the old school. He was a good public speaker and held a consulship with the dignity of a bygone age. He was an assurance that Hadrian's policies would continue. Hadrian was very sick, and it seemed that he tried to commit suicide on a number of occasions because he was suffering each day from his illness. Hadrian almost succeeded by ending his own life by having one of his servants help him. Dio Cassius reports, partly by threatening him and partly by making promises, he forced the man to promise to kill him. He drew a coloured line about a spot beneath the nipple that had been shown him by Hermogenes, his physician, in order that he might be struck a fatal blow there and die without pain. Antoninus Pius was informed of the suicide attempt and begged Hadrian to endure his sickness. A fragment of Hadrian's autobiography has survived, and it reads almost as an apology to Antoninus. He writes, "I want you to know that I am being released from my life neither before my time, nor unreasonably, nor piteously, nor unexpectedly, nor with faculties impaired, even though I shall almost seem as if I have found to do injury to you who are by my side whenever I am in need of attendance, consoling and encouraging me to rest." In the summer of 138 AD, Hadrian left Rome for the last time to an imperial villa on the seaside resort of Baiae, where he abandoned all medical treatment and ate and drank whatever he wanted. On the 10th of July, Hadrian cried out, "Many doctors killed a king," and passed away shortly after.
Okay.
He was 62 years old and had ruled the empire for 21 years. His remains were eventually placed in the new mausoleum built outside Rome. He was deified as Divus Hadrianus. Antoninus was proclaimed Emperor of Rome. He had been the de facto ruler for months anyway. Legacy. Hadrian's legacy is somewhat mixed. Objectively, he was a conscientious ruler that left the Roman state stronger than he found it, and he left many impressive monuments behind that still echo the greatness of Rome to this very day. But his contemporaries did not give him such praise. His own wife Sabina is reported saying in public that, because of his monstrous personality, she had taken pains not to become pregnant by him, for it would be to the destruction of the human race. And his inauguration was tainted by the killing of 4 ex-consuls, an act Hadrian was never truly forgiven for.
I mean, they tried to kill him, though.
His increasingly erratic behaviour towards the end also tainted his legacy, and there seem to have been objections to Hadrian's personality, a hard-working but cocksure man, a combination often irritating to his colleagues.
Okay, so my thoughts on Hadrian. I don't think, first off, whatever, to his wife. Oh well, you know. But at the end of his life, come on, man. He was suffering. A suffering man, you can't utilize that as part of his legacy. It's not like he did anything, it's not like he was like King Henry VIII when he was, did the measures of what Henry did at the end of his life. So, like, I mean, this guy was right there with Trajan, I would say, because of his tour, his resortment to be present, to go places that most emperors not have gone, to reinforce the boundaries, to diplomatically solve issues without war, to build, to repair, to incite health to the people. I think he was I would even say Hadrian is like neck and neck with Trajan. I think Trajan has a little bit more legacy because of what he did in Dacia, but Hadrian seems like he was a very Pax Romana type of guy. Interesting stuff. Maybe he doesn't have like the military achievements that Trajan had or Augustus had, but he was definitely pious, it seems. He probably had a temper. I mean, think about it. You're very stressed at that position. You have a lot going on. But overall, it seems like holistically he did good. So, interesting stuff. Add me some context if you have any. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys so much. Until next time, peace out. By the way, subscribe if you watched this entire thing. You deserve it. You deserve it. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.